to die, to sleep no more. And by a sleep we say we end the heartache and the thousand natural shocks that flesh is heir to. 'Tis a consummation devoutly to be wished. Wait a minute. This is psych class, not English. That's okay though. I can still use this for psych. So Hamlet, in his To Be or Not to Be speech, talks about how restful and peaceful sleep is. That during sleep we can just kind of forget about everything that goes on around us and we can kind of relax. And that's exactly right. Let's put it in psych terms now as we go along talking about REM and n-REM sleep and what happens during REM and n-REM sleep as far as the rejuvenation of the body. All right. This graph here, what we have are hours of sleep that we need on this axis and then our age on the bottom axis here. So when we're little infants up here, about 16 hours of sleep. By the time we're 45, 50, now we're down to about 7.5 to 8 hours of sleep. Okay? So the question becomes, why is it that our n-REM sleep declines so much versus our n-REM sleep? And the main factor here is that REM sleep is known to be good for brain development. So when we're younger and our brains are developing so much that REM sleep is really necessary for our brains to develop fully. So by the time that we get into our mid-20s or so, that REM sleep starts to level off a little bit more because the brain has developed. n-REM sleep is actually responsible for some other things like blood flow, blood glucose levels, clearing out the brain of plaques that cause Alzheimer's. So that's going to be stuff that we're going to need throughout our lifespan, so that decline's not going to be quite as significant. All right, so why do we need REM sleep? Well, we know that REM sleep is crucial for learning and brain development. So they've done a lot of studies where they'll do like a memory task. So they'll give participants a series of things to remember, and then they'll give them, put them to bed, and then they'll deprive them of n-REM sleep, and then ask them to remember whatever it was they showed them the night before. People that were deprived of n-REM sleep could do the task fairly well. You do the same study, but you deprive them of REM sleep, they couldn't remember as well. So it's going to be really important as far as REM sleep is concerned for you guys, like on a test day. You know, before SATs, they always say, get a really good night's sleep. Yeah, get a really good night's sleep because your memory will function better if you've gotten a good night's sleep before a big test. Another cool thing about REM sleep too, they've done studies where they'll show participants disturbing images that evoke like a fear response. And then they deprive them of REM sleep, and that fear response will be as strong the next day. If people got a good night of rest and weren't deprived of REM sleep, their emotional responses to the pictures are actually less severe than they were the day before. And what they think is that norepinephrine gets shut off during REM sleep. And norepinephrine is one of the stress response neurotransmitters. And it's still flowing during n-REM sleep, but REM sleep, it kind of turns off. And now you're affecting the amygdala and those emotional response systems. So if you don't get enough REM sleep, then those stress hormones have been going, or something like norepinephrine. It hasn't turned off, so it hasn't relaxed some of your stress responses. Sleep's divided. Well, we know that sleep's divided into n-REM and REM. And then there's a cool phenomenon called REM rebound. Let's say you get like 4 hours of sleep one night, so you can't go through all the cycles of sleep, so you've lost some of your REM sleep. Well, what will happen is the next night you'll fall almost immediately into REM sleep. You get there real quick. And that's just your body's way of finding its equilibrium and getting some of that REM sleep that it lost the night before. That's not going to hurt you short term for a couple of nights. Now, you drag that on, or you get somebody that has a true sleep disorder and they're really losing a lot of REM sleep, you're going to see some pretty significant health impacts later on. So REM rebound is rebounding right into REM sleep the night after a poor night of sleep. Possible functions of sleep. This one's a fun one to think about from an evolutionary perspective to protect us from danger at night. What happens at night? 2 million years ago, if there's no artificial light and it's pitch black outside and humans don't see very well in the nighttime, and all the other animals that are hunting humans can see you very well. So we go into the back of our caves and go to sleep and kind of hide rather than wander around at night and become prey for saber-toothed tigers. Restore the body. I've already talked about this with both REM and n-REM sleep. n-REM sleep is going to help with things like I said, blood glucose, clearing out some of those plaques from the brain. REM sleep is going to shut down norepinephrine and some of the stress hormones. It's just kind of a restorative aspect. Again, going back to the to be or not to be speech and that feeling of rest and relaxation that we all know so well. Cool one here is to consolidate memories. We are bombarded with stimulation day in and day out. We have all of these things that our brain could remember from a day of activity. And they think that one of the functions of sleep and dreams is to actually filter out some of that information and to grab the stuff that the brain thinks, oh, that's important, I need to remember that, and to filter out stuff that they think, it's not a big deal, we don't need to remember that. A lot of studies done on creative thinking the day after a good night of sleep versus the day after a night of sleep deprivation of some sort. We know that good sleep leads to more creative thinking. Again, when you're thinking about test taking, think about different types of tests. I talked about memory tests and kind of those regurgitate the facts that you learned test. But there's also those tests where you have to be creative with responding to an essay question or in English or in the psych class. Sometimes some of our questions are, do you know the definition of REM sleep? And sometimes we give you the application, we give you the scenario, and you have to apply the term. Well, that becomes more creative. A good night of sleep will help you to do that better. And just to flat out support your growth, we need sleep to grow better, especially obviously when we're younger. There is something called sleep debt. If we lose sleep, especially over a period of time, that will accumulate and we will have sleep debt. If that really continues, that will affect our health pretty profoundly. You can actually catch up on sleep if you are sleep deprived. You can grab another hour or two and kind of make up for a lost hour or two a night or two before. Now, here's the trick though. You can't just sleep for an extra 5 hours on Saturday and say, that's me getting all my sleep back. It doesn't work like that because you're throwing off the circadian rhythms, because what happens on Sunday? You got to get back into a groove of getting a good night of sleep. So what's best if you really have sleep debt is to grab an extra hour of sleep over a period of a few days rather than trying to compile it all in one day. And then sleep disorders, I'm actually going to stop there. I'll let Mr. Woodard pick up with sleep disorders. But before I go, a couple of quick reminders or a couple of quick examples going back to Mr. Woodard's video. He talked about sleepwalking. And when you're into disorders and that sleepwalking, and he talked about 30 Rock and Liz Lemon going to the kitchen and cooking something, that's a real thing. One of the videos that we have on here shows somebody actually doing that. And then the night terror deal, he told about Mr. Robinson. My son actually had sleep terrors as well, but when he was even younger, he was just a little baby, and he would just scream and go absolutely rigid. Every muscle in his little body would fire. You couldn't wake him up. We tried cold water, we tried everything we could think of, couldn't wake him up. And that's not necessarily a sleep disorder. Especially a lot of kids, a lot of young ones will have night terrors when they're little. It can become a disorder if it's continuous throughout the life cycle. Mr. Woodard, go ahead and take it away.